Intriguing. Intriguing.
It's very intriguing. So I think we should start.
Let's start.
We'll let more people
Hello,
in.
Donna.
Hello, my cousin Sherry.
Does everybody know that Donna Berman is my cousin? Does everybody know that we're family here?
We're family here. And by the way, Sherry's work is so amazing that I end up telling people that we're actually identical twins. I wish we were, but yes. So welcome everybody. We're so glad you're here. It's so good again to see your names rather than your face. I love to see your faces though. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm so excited to be spending the evening with you and with my dear cousin, Sherry Turkle. Remember when your parents came to open school day and your two worlds kind of merged and you were so excited about that? Well, I feel like that tonight. And it really, truly, truly delights my heart. So before I introduce Sherry, I want to tell you a few things. During this pandemic, you may have noticed that we at Charter Oak decided to ramp up our programming rather than pull back because we wanted to be a source of healing and comfort, a constant, familiar, loving presence in your lives. So if you have found our programming to be inspiring or enlightening and have appreciated our consistent offerings and would like to make a donation so that we may continue our work, we would very much appreciate that. We could really use your support, no matter how large or small the gift. Every dollar counts. And here's a look ahead at some of those really wonderful programs that are coming up. On Thursday, May 13th, we will have that's a week from tonight, we will have an art opening of work created by people in war-torn countries who, with the guidance of artists from a nonprofit called Artolution, have created art to soothe their souls in the midst of the terrible conditions in which they are living. It's very, very powerful. It's remarkable, inspiring work that speaks to the tenacity of the human spirit. Artolution does similar work to Charter Oak, but they work internationally. On Monday, May 17th, we will be offering a mindfulness workshop called A Peace of Mind, the Science and Practice of Awareness and Self-Care with Camellia Smith from Copper Beach Institute. So I hope you'll join us for that. And then on Monday, May 24th at noon, we will be holding a virtual open house to make an amazingly exciting announcement about Charter Oak and a miracle, I swear to God, a miracle that happened. So tune in that day to find out the news. I'm not going to tell you tonight. You got to come on May 24th at noon. So tonight is brought to you by Charter Oak and by our very dear friends at the Mark Twain House and Hartford Stage. We are very proud to partner with these wonderful institutions. Just a little housekeeping before we begin our chat. Please set your view to speaker and please write any questions you might have in the chat because Sherry will be entertaining your questions at the end of our conversation. So it kind of brings a little bit of a tear to my eye. It's my tremendous honor to introduce someone I love very much, Sherry Turkle. Sherry is the Abby Rockefeller Mose Professor of the Social Studies of Science and Technology at MIT and the founding director of the MIT Initiative on Technology and Self. A licensed clinical psychologist, she's the author of 6 books, including Alone Together and the New York Times bestseller, Reclaiming Conversation, as well as the editor of 3 collections. Sherry appeared on the cover of Wired magazine. She is a Ms. Magazine Woman of the Year, TED speaker, featured media commentator, a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Rockefeller Humanities Fellowship. She is also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And I believe that Sherry, notwithstanding the fact that we are family, but I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I think that Sherry is one of the great thinkers of the 20th and 21st centuries. She is among the first people to understand over 50 years ago that computers would not merely be repositories of information, but would change society in ways that we needed to be vigilant about. She is brilliant. She is bold. Her work is vital to the health and well-being of our society. She is here to talk about her marvelous new book, a memoir entitled The Empathy Diaries. It is beyond a joy to introduce to you my cousin, Sherry Turkle. Hi.
Hi, Donna.
Welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be
It's
here.
great to see you. The last time we were together in person was Rosh Hashanah 2019. And hopefully this weekend, maybe we can have a real visit and not see each other on a screen. So I have a few questions for you. Should we just jump in?
Jump in.
Okay. You know, I've often thought of Natalie Cole recording Unforgettable, singing in a room filled with the sound of her deceased father's voice. How did it feel to you to re-inhabit the world of your early childhood, your world with your grandfather and grandmother and aunt and mother as you were writing this book?
You know, when I contemplated writing memoir, it's such a great question because to everybody here, this is my first memoir. It's like I've written about the emotional impact of technology on people, how computers don't just change what we do, but who we are. That's like been my thing for like almost 40 years. So it's not like, oh, I've written a lot of memoirs and this is like my most recent foray. So this is like the first time. And I thought that it would be upsetting. But in fact, it's such a good question. And I should say that Donna and I haven't like talked about these questions. I didn't expect, I'm just answering it as it's such a good question because it was deeply comforting. I felt as though I was living with people who I realized had sustained me in such profound ways that when I was young and when there was a lot of people who read the book or have heard about the book, there was a lot of conflict. My mother was married to a man, was my father, but then he was not a great choice. And she left him when I was a baby. We're very young. There was a crisis and she left him and I didn't find out why until I, discovered him with detectives, 30 years later. And I was angry at her and I didn't know why she had left and she never let me use his name and my name was Sherry Zimmerman, but she made me call myself Sherry Turkle. I mean, there was a lot of conflict and lying and not, just secrets. And so there was a lot of, it wasn't a peaceful family situation, but it was when I was retelling the story and was beyond all of that, Donna, and was really telling the story of what these people had given to me, that I saw that underneath all that, where they felt compelled to keep my biological father from me because they were afraid of him, I saw how deep their love was for me and how they had nurtured and sustained me. And I felt comforted and inhabited by them, and I felt I had company. I felt less alone, and I wrote it during the pandemic, lots of it, and it really made me feel less alone during the pandemic, actually.
Almost as if you invoked their spirits as you were writing it, huh?
Yes, and I think the book kind of reads that way, as though I'm in conversation with them and I'm saying, you gave me such a hard time, but thank you. And there are places in the book where I talk about the fact that I didn't know what was going on. I mean, you tell a little girl, hey, you can't use your name. We're not going to tell anybody who your father is. And don't you dare say you had one. I was like, hold on a second. I'm like, my name isn't Bonowitz. My name isn't Turkle. I know that. Shh. I was always confused, always marginal, always wondering what was wrong with me. So I was quite traumatized by all this secrecy. And yet, and I tell the story of how, because of that, I would show little cruelties to these family members. And I'm very honest. I talk about little cruelties that I showed as a child because I couldn't talk about what was really on my mind, which was, why was I being asked to lie? And somehow in the writing of the book, I was able to forgive myself too, because in context, I could see, well, of course I showed this little baby cruelty because I was being asked to do something impossible. And I realized that my lifelong desire for empathy and to bring people together and to have people talk to each other. My last book was called Reclaiming Conversation, for God's sake, has been because nobody would have those conversations with me. That desire for empathy and conversation really comes out of a context where people were not good at that in our family.
In a way, this book is like the end product of a process you went through. Would you say that, did you go through anger before you got to empathy?
Well, I went through a lot more than anger. I mean, the process of writing this book, I'll tell you how the book started. The book started, I wrote a book that was very popular. It was the first book on sort of computers and how they change our feelings. It was called The Second Self in 1984. My mother had been dead for 15 years, but I was still keeping her secret. I'd never told anybody that I had a father whose name was Charles Zimmerman. I'd never seen him. I'd never found him. I'd once said to a college boyfriend his name, and then I was like struck dumb. I was like, I was so terrified that I told her secret. And when this book did really well, I was named one of Esquire magazine's 40 young people under 40 who were changing the nation. And they sent a young psychiatrist to write an article about me, a puff piece. So he comes to interview me in my office at MIT, and he opens up his notebook, and he says, "Hello, Dr. Turkle, Professor Turkle. I need to, we're going to write a little story about you. So in your acknowledgments, you thank, your dead mother, you thank your grandmother, you thank your aunt, you thank your grandpa. Who was your father? There's nothing about any, could you just say a word about, dad And at this point, I was alienated from my stepfather because my stepfather really had sort of interfered with my going to college. He had, after my mother died, he had really interfered with my going to college. I'd had to drop out of college because he had wanted me to kind of drop out of college and come home and take care of his children. I was not on great terms with him. My biological father I hadn't seen. I was keeping my mother's secret. And so I say to him, well, I can't discuss anything about my personal life. We can only discuss my private life, my work, my contribution, my intellectual contribution. And he says to me, well, look, your whole brand is thought and feeling go together. That's the brand of your whole thing here. The whole article is about the integration of, isn't that on the first page of your book, the integration of thought and feeling? And he wrote in his article about me in Esquire magazine, I think I quoted in the Empathy Diaries, for somebody whose brand is the integration of thought and feeling, this woman wears a lot of masks. And as he walked out of my office, I said to myself, this stops now. This stops now. I picked up the phone and I called my half sister and brother, who never knew that I was their half sister. And I said, I've never told you this. It was a secret that mommy wanted me to keep, but here's the deal. I called my stepfather. I said, I'm not keeping this. There's no secret here that needs to be kept, as though I've done something wrong, as though there's a horrible. And I kind of came out and I began my life in the sun, and it changed my life. That I owe that Esquire reporter everything. and that's where I decided that, I mean, I didn't like start writing the book, but that my interest in empathy and in truth and in conversation really came from my own deprivation. It
Mm.
didn't, as and my fascination with honest conversation came from my own deprivation, and my own needing to read other people's minds about why I was being deprived of the truth of my life. And that's when I decided I would hire detectives and find my biological father, which of course is one of the themes of this book as well.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of genesis of the story. That's how it started.
How did you decide which last name to ultimately embrace? What made you decide to embrace Turkle as your last name?
Well, so when my name is Sherry, my name is my biological father's name is Charles Zimmerman, and my mother and my name was Sherry Zimmerman legally. At school, I had to write my name out as Sherry Zimmerman, and then I would go home and I would hide under lock and key all the papers that had Sherry Zimmerman on it so that my stepsister and brother, my half sister and brother, wouldn't see them, so that no one would know that I was a Zimmerman, and wasn't a Turkle. And when I was about 15, Milton Turkle adopted me. They managed to get Charles Zimmerman out of the picture. And I've later found out, how they did that. And I mean, he didn't go easily, and they managed to do that. At that point, my name was Sherry Turkle. And you could say, well, why did I keep that name? And
Right.
I was kind of dumb about, I didn't know that you could just go to, the idea that you just need to go to court and say, hi, I'd like to change my name. I think I would have changed my name to Sherry Bonowitz and taken the name.
Wow.
I mean, it's not like you have to change your name to something that means something. And I think that readers of the book will understand why I would have changed my name to the name of my grandfather and the Bonowitz family. But I wasn't like sophisticated. I mean, when I was in college, nobody said, well, you can just go to court and, once you're 18, you just go to court and you just change your name to whatever, I'd never, that thought was not like in the cultural zeitgeist of Brooklyn, where I was, takes a certain sophistication. And once I had written my first book, I somehow, in my mind, was Sherry Turkle. And then I just sort of said to myself, okay, Sherry Turkle is a different, Sherry Turkle is now a person who is not, she is just, I'm taking care of Sherry Turkle. She is a person somehow separated from this history. But actually, it's a source still, it's a great question. And it's a source of, I would say, it's a source of conflict. That I'm going to be buried in a plot with all the Jews from Volozhin, where all the Bonowitzes are buried. And I'm in the Bonowitz family plot with all of the Bonowitzes. So,
I mean, in a way,
says something is that actually there's a line in the book where I say to my mother, I'm talking to my mother, and I said, before you were fighting to make me a Turkle, you were struggling to make me a Turkle, but both of us were Bonowitzes before all that struggle began. And that's kind of the way I've resolved that in my mind, that I am a Bonowitz before all that struggle began.
Yeah, and it kind of leads us to talk a little bit about, well, I say cousin Mildred, your Aunt Mildred.
Yes.
Mildred Bonowitz.
Yes.
Because in some ways, Sherry, wouldn't you say in some ways she was at the very least a second mother to you?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, she really, you were saying to me today on the phone that she really saw you, and that in the way you were
I
both
think
kind of
she saved
outsiders.
my life. I think I put it more strongly. I should say the family lineage for those of you who aren't deep into doing the genealogy chart, for those of you who aren't on ancestry.com and are not deep into our genealogy, we should explain that um, my my grandmother is Edith Berman. My grandfather is Robert Bonowitz, and Edith Berman had a brother Irving Berman, who is Donna's grandfather. That's the connection. And Robert and Edith Bonowitz had two daughters. One of them was my mother, first Harriet Bonowitz, then Harriet Zimmerman, and then Harriet Turkle. And the other one was a woman named Mildred Bonowitz, who never married and who always was for me um, a, a presence. To call it maternal doesn't quite cover it. I mean, she was maternal, but I think of it more as a sustaining presence because she wasn't afraid of who I really was. My mother saw me and she saw a pretty girl and she said, "Oh, good, she's pretty. I can relate to that. She'll have boyfriends." And she said, "Oh, she's clever. She'll marry somebody clever. She'll get a good job." My aunt saw me and she said, "She loves to write. She will be a writer. She will be a scholar. She will be a thinker. She loves to read. She will be a reader. She loves to sit alone and think. She's not afraid of solitude." And, she saw a kind of oddball kid and she wasn't afraid of that um, quirky, over intellectual, marginal. I mean, I was no cheerleader, I mean, I might have been pretty, but I was no, I wanted to sit alone and read. And my aunt wasn't afraid of that. She said, "Let's go to the theater. Let's read a book together and talk about it. Let's take a walk. Let's." And when I said, "I want to go to Radcliffe," nobody's heard of Radcliffe. I mean, why Radcliffe? John F. Kennedy went to Harvard. I wrote away to Harvard. I said, "I want to go to Harvard because John F. Kennedy went to Harvard." That was I had no other connection to Harvard. And Harvard wrote me back. My grandmother had taught me how to write business letters. And I wrote to Harvard. I said, "How do you get in? What do I have to do?" And they said, "Ms. Turkle, you need to, you can't come because you're a young woman, but you can apply to Radcliffe." I wrote away and they wrote me back. It was a done deal at 11, 12 years old. I was decided that I was going to go to Radcliffe. I told my aunt. I wouldn't dare tell my mother. And she didn't, she said, "Well, we'll see what we need to do that. Well, they probably have scholarships. They probably, well, let's check that out." And when I told her that you had to be number one in your high school class, in your junior high school class from Brooklyn to get a scholarship to do that, she said, "That is tough. That's a tough road ahead for you." But she didn't say, "Oh my God, don't try." She just said, "That's going to be a tough road ahead for you, but is it worth it to you?" But she was
She was much more worldly. I mean, how did she? where did she get that from? We were saying, you and I were saying on the phone today,
Yeah.
she was very different than the rest of the family, and you were very different than the rest of the family, and you found each other.
We found each other. Well, I think that I actually think that she went to Brooklyn College. As I did research into her life, I think that she went to Brooklyn College when there was a lot of left-wing political activity at Brooklyn College. And I think that she was a part of that. And I think that my grandmother was always afraid of that coming out during the McCarthy period. I think that my grandmother lived with a tremendous amount of anxiety about what might come out about Mildred's political activities. Because my aunt used to take me, I mean, she was hardly a rabble rouser, but my aunt used to take me to Brooklyn College to listen to speeches on civil rights. And I mean, we didn't exactly go to demonstrations, but I wouldn't have known about these things had it not been for my aunt. I think I was 10 years old. We would just sit in this big auditorium in Brooklyn College and listen to, things about what was going on in the South and what was going on in the civil rights movement. I would be, my eyes were saucers. That was not what people in my family were talking about.
I was thinking about Mildred today. I think about her a lot, actually. I mean, first of all, she had such a wry sense of humor. She was very funny. She was very smart. And really, she was the only person in the family who was political.
Yeah.
And in many ways, the work I do in my life was inspired by her.
Yes, she brought politics to me. And she wasn't afraid of a fight. Remember, I had a boyfriend in the book. I name him. It's called Ricky. Rick. And he was very good to me. He was a very loving man. And he was trying to avoid the draft, as everyone in his generation was. And we went out, and I wanted to show, my mother had died, and I wanted to show my boyfriend to my aunt. I was proud of this Harvard educated, very brilliant boyfriend. And she took us out, and of course she wanted to meet him because she was now my family. And of course everybody was on very good behavior. And we go to this is like this first serious boyfriend. We go to this nice Chinese restaurant. She's going to pay for it. This is like she's in the role of mother of the bride, right? I ended up not marrying him, but that was kind of and they get into a fight where he's hoping the draft will be abolished. I mean, naturally. And she's saying how important it is for there to be a draft, or the middle classes will not feel a stake in the wars that America fights. And we will just palm off these wars to people of color and poor people. And it'll be like having a mercenary army.
Wow.
Of course, she was right. And poor Ricky is arguing for how we need to not have a draft, and I could see that my aunt was 100% like informed and knew the examples of other countries that hadn't had, she was like totally political and that's how she was. And the fact that I had a boyfriend that I was like nurturing and cultivating, and I wanted to like my family. She was on him like, with the full force of a lifetime of arguing politics. That was Mildred.
Yeah, she didn't hold back. She totally
she demolished this boyfriend, and we leave the restaurant, and he says, well, Mildred says, well, I have my car. I'm going to take Sherry home to Brooklyn. He says, yeah, I'm going to drive home to Scarsdale. Nice meeting you.
I know you know this, but it bears repeating. You were the most important person in Mildred's life. That was always clear. And I want to say, people might not know this, but my mom was very, very ill for a long time. And Mildred was so kind to her, and they hung out. And so Mildred was my father's cousin. My father was deceased at that point. Mildred really spent a lot of time with my mother. She's really the only person in the family, who did that. And she'd take my mom out. My mom couldn't drive anymore, and she would drive around with my mom. And I also want to say that it was a very hard time in my mom's life. It was a very hard time in my life. And I will never, ever, ever forget how kind you were. I talked to you and I told you the pressure I was under, and you said, your mom needs a driver so that she can,
Yeah.
be independent, and you made that happen. And I don't know that I've ever really thanked you enough for that. It was a very, very
Well, I
kind.
remember, I think I took my advance from one of my books, and I think I just,
Is that what you
my
did?
first authorial, I think that was my first authorial.
It was very,
My
very, very kind
pleasure.
of
It
you.
was my pleasure. But
Very-
Mildred, I mean, really, it was a gift, from Mildred. I mean, Mildred was, there's a story in the book about Mildred. I think I'm going to read it. It's called A Speedy, and I actually think it's worth reading because it gives an example of Mildred, of the kind of woman that Mildred was, and it. I'm finding it. I have a version of my book
Yeah.
here that's.
She, she had a magical quality. She could make stuff happen. And this is a good example of her making something happen for you.
Yes, it's an example. So I'm trying to find.
See, I read the book. You could tell, right?
What?
See,
Yeah, I know you read the book. I know you read the book. So this is part of my life where I'm in Paris. After my mother dies, I go to Paris because my family wants me to get me away from my stepfather, who they felt was not a good influence on me. He had wanted me to drop out of college and take care of my stepsister and brother. And they said, and I did drop out of college and had to return later. But I worked as a cleaning lady in Paris. I didn't have any money, and it was a character building experience. And Mildred comes to visit me, and I'm living in a basically in a, they call it a chambre de bonne. I mean, I'm living in a maid's room, and Mildred had booked a room, a modest room in a hotel, visiting me. And this is the story of Mildred's visit to Paris. So it's a little bit long, but I think it just gives such a sense of Mildred and the kind of way she supported me. Because Mildred was not a wealthy woman, but she always had a very responsible job working, and she had no dependents. So, I mean, her money was to support herself and to help out my grandparents. And she did things like this for me. I'd arrived in Paris with 2 pieces of luggage: a backpack that I'd bought before my hitchhiking tour to Brittany in 1967, and the red Samsonite luggage that I brought to Radcliffe at the beginning of freshman year. I was determined that Samsonite bag not come back with me. I became obsessed with luggage. I had few possessions and I didn't need anything big. I was basically throwing out all of the, kind of cheap clothes that I brought to Radcliffe. They were all wrong. It was just at the transition where really all I needed was blue jeans and a couple of sweaters. I picked up the pace of my tutoring, which was how I was earning money. I earned enough money to afford a capacious duffel at my beloved Prise Unique, which was kind of a Woolworths where I bought all my clothes. But really, I wanted something beautiful as well as practical, something I would keep for a long time, something that would symbolize what I had achieved here. English-speaking Sherry would perhaps never be as brave as her French-speaking counterpart, but increasingly she could hold her own. I sort of talk about how in French I was braver than I was in English. In the window of a luggage store on the Rue de Rennes was a traveling bag of taupe and brown jacquard fabric. I went in to inquire about it. I was told it was officially called the Boston bag. That seemed like a sign, but this bag had another name because of its shape. The salesperson kept referring to it as the Speedy. Over 50 years later, it is hard to say what the Speedy meant to me. I was searching for what a woman of substance would carry as she traveled the world, something that would hold her notebooks, her manuscripts. Who were my idols? Susan Sontag, Joan Didion, Lillian Hellman. They would have a bag that would never need to be replaced. It would have an unusual, elegant shape. They would take it on the airplane when they flew off to give a lecture, so they would never have to check luggage. From time to time, as I studied for my Sciences Po finals, I visited the Speedy. I would pick it up and imagine myself having places to go, papers to deliver, books to write. I had no way of buying it. Mildred visited me in late May, just before it was time to return home. We had breakfast together in my studio. The studio was a little strong in my room. I made her an omelet. She was worried about me. When I'd come home to attend Bruce's bar mitzvah, I had seemed depressed. That's my brother. I'd gained weight. Young girls are supposed to go to Paris and slim down. And I'd worn a wig. Why was that? Was I losing my hair? I had lost my hair. She was proud that I'd made it through the year, but she could tell it had been a struggle. Had Paris been a mistake? Had she abandoned me to what seemed like the right thing, sending me off to a strange country where I knew no one, just because it seemed as far as one could get from Milton? Milton was my stepfather. I tried to reassure her. I was on some kind of journey. I was not always happy. I confessed that sometimes I ate pain d'épices instead of real food. I'd seen a French doctor who said that I did have a kind of hair loss that comes with stress. The body takes a shock. Happily, my hair seemed to be growing back. I answered the question she did not ask. I was not in danger. I never thought of suicide. I could tell that I was going to be some kind of writer. I even had an idea for my senior thesis, and I thought I might try to be a professor, but I worried that I didn't know any women academics. Mildred shrugged. I think you should take it as far as you can take it until you're stopped and you don't see a way around. I stared at her, moved. Mildred had served her bosses and didn't know how to break out of that cycle. She had no confidence in herself. She only had confidence in me. Over breakfast in my tiny kitchen, Mildred asked if I needed anything, wanted anything. I said no. Having her with me in Paris was my unexpected treat. She said that she wanted to buy me a birthday present. I was going to be 21, a special birthday. Since my mother died, we had not taken time for any celebrations. And so I told her about a piece of luggage so fancy that it had a name. Mildred laughed. She wanted to see it immediately. Together, Mildred and I put our faces against the glass on the Rue Rennes, and she came up with a plan. During her Paris visit, we would eat pâté sandwiches and sidewalk croque-monsieurs. She would check out of her hotel and sleep next to me in my new Murphy bed. If we did all this, we could buy the Speedy. Mildred consoled me about the price by assuring me it was timeless. It was made by Dior. It would last forever. I was carrying it 25 years later when I went to pick her up at an Arizona airport where she was to fly to meet me for a holiday vacation. She never made it to the plane. She had died in her apartment as she prepared to take this vacation with me. I had long before bought her a Speedy of her own, a blue one she carried whenever we got together. And that's Mildred and the Speedy. So, I mean,
That's
I was a
very-
penniless cleaning lady with this Dior bag.
yeah, yeah,
And I still have it. I know. I mean,
yeah.
it is.
It's 50 years old, right? First of all, it's so touching to hear about that, and I remember the day that we got the news that she died. There is such a and then I want to ask you a little bit about your grandfather, and we would take some questions from the audience. But there's such you have such an aesthetic sense. Mildred did too. And beauty was very important to your mom. I remember in the book, it says that she would love to go to the department stores, even if she couldn't afford to buy anything,
Right.
just to see the beautiful, beautiful things. Is that something that you still, I think it is, but can you speak to what that means to you in your life now? Like that kind of commitment to the beautiful.
Yes. I never really thought about that until I was writing the book, because I thought of, um, because it's complicated, because my grandmother had nothing of value except the most beautiful dishes that her mother had bought her for her wedding on the Lower East Side. And in the book, the cover of the book, the cover of the book, the outer ring of the cover are those dishes. And in the book, there's an illustration of the dishes. And they're beautiful. And she knew that only these dishes would outlive her as a thing of beauty that her daughters would inherit, and that I would inherit, and that my daughter would inherit, that she had nothing else. And her love of these dishes as truly something so beautiful made such an impression on me as a child. And Mildred's love of these dishes. I mean, these were people who really had nothing much. And these dishes that were as beautiful as any dishes that anyone could have, really became a kind of aesthetic object in our family, that when we sat down to have dinner at these dishes for holidays, we were eating on the dishes of princes. And it meant so much to her. And it meant so much to my mother and to Mildred and to me. And I just became very interested in, what made these dishes so beautiful. Her father, my grandmother's father, had been a wealthier man. He had owned a dry goods store. He had sold fabric. Her mother had had a maid. I mean, when these dishes were bought, they had had money, and they had bought her something truly of great beauty. And then, my grandfather, had been a bookbinder, and her fortunes, she had a reversal of fortunes. But her daughters had no money, but were beautifully tailored and elegantly tailored. Each of them had one suit, and it was a beautiful navy suit. And they had one navy suit for winter and one navy suit for summer, one in linen and one in wool. And so there was a sense of almost Parisian chic.
Yes.
In both of her daughters. Not a lot of it was they were sort of European women in their dress and in their allure. And I'm not giving myself airs, but I grew up with that sensibility that when you buy china, you should save up, and it should be the finest. I mean, I use my grandmother's china. It's the finest china. I mean, I love beautiful clothes. I wanted my Speedy. I was going to wait for my Speedy.
Right.
I was working as a cleaning lady. I was doing floors, and I was going to do floors until I bought that Speedy. And Mildred stepped in and speeded up the process.
I was going to ask you about the cover. In the first book event you had, I attended it virtually, and your son-in-law Ben asked this question about the significance of the cover art, but it really is a mandala, and it really is an homage to your grandmother, because of the outer ring is this, right? Is this
The outer ring of the cover is the banding of my grandmother's dishes. And then you have the Nancy Drew mystery stories. You have the letter that my mother wrote me when I was in Paris. You have a picture of my biological father who took me once on a rowboat in Prospect Park Lake, an event that takes on in my unconscious an importance that overshadows almost anything else that's ever happened to me. It's kind of like it's like, what is the key event in my life? I once went rowboating with my father on Prospect Park Lake. And then you have me kind of starting out in life in my Nancy Drew Roadster when I graduated from Radcliffe, starting out.
Did you design this? Did you design the mandala?
I had a lot of, I have a wonderful publisher. I have just a truly wonderful, Penguin Press has been just a wonderful publisher. And I would say I had intense input into the cover design. We worked on many.
It's like the book. It's lovely and rich and just beautiful. I want to tell you something, and we'll maybe one more question, then we'll go to the questions in the chat. But first of all, you are obviously a marvelous storyteller, and if I want to say to everybody who's here, if you love the way Sherry tells stories, the book is filled with her storytelling, and it is just it's marvelous. It's like having another conversation with her. But I want to tell you that I hope I don't offend anybody, but I say that I don't read books, I eat books, and the way I do that is I write all over them. But I have never, this is not hyperbole, I have never written all over a book the way I wrote over this book, because so I just want to show you. This is just, and I have just pages of notes. Now, I knew I was going to be interviewing you, but it is such a rich text. And I mean, I have pages that are just covered, and just like that. And I just want to say it is such a rich text. It is one of the things that I really admire about you, and something that you talk about a lot, is thinking about how you thinking about thinking. And your chapter on Lacan, we were, our goal tonight was to talk about your childhood, but is just the way you lay out how you think about things. It's exquisite and it's magnificent. And I don't know anybody who can do that the way that you do that.
Thank you.
And you must be just such a marvelous teacher, because you just lay things out in this really beautiful way. I think the way that Pythagoras must have thought about numbers, you make us think about ideas, that they're important, and there's a beauty, going back to beauty, there's a beauty in them. I have so many more questions. I can't even believe it's almost 8 o'clock. But do you want to read the section about the malt shop?
Sure.
Okay.
So the way I wrote the book, I should just give a little, is that I thought of these main characters, a little bit about my writing process. And I tried to come up with stories that would illustrate the character of the main characters. And this, so I thought of it almost, I think I said when I was discussing with Amelia, almost like a play. What were the scenes that would really dramatize the main character? So this is a scene with my grandfather, who really was the man of my life. Twice a week, my grandfather took me for a treat. This is when we would have summers in Rockaway, a malted milkshake at the 54th Street candy store. The malted machines were lined up in a row, heavy green metal with stainless steel trim. On malted days, my grandfather and I would sit side by side at the long red Bakelite soda fountain. It was still morning, But my grandfather, who'd gotten off work only a few hours before, always had a kind of jet lag. From his point of view, it was time to celebrate the end of a long workday. He always ordered a chocolate ice cream soda for himself and a chocolate malted for me. On these malted days, as we waited for our drinks, I learned about life on the Lower East Side as it had been in the old days, the anti-Semitism of the streets. I learned about how hurt my grandfather was that one of his brothers had changed his name from Bonowitz to Bonner. My grandfather loved his brother. He didn't want to judge, but he didn't approve. Mostly he was pained at what it took to get ahead in America. On one particular day at the candy store, my grandfather's soda was ready first. The icy drink had frosted the outside of the tall fluted glass. The fresh whipped cream was a perfect triangle on top of the liquid. My malted was in progress. The liquid was blended in a tall aluminum cylinder. You could drink what felt like an entire malted, and still there was more. That sense of plenty reminded my grandfather of what he wanted for me. Only marry a generous man, he said. When I was courting your grandmother, I couldn't afford to take her to dinner. So I took her to the push carts. We went to 2 push carts, the pickles and the pretzels. She had 1 pickle, I ordered her another, and when she asked for 1 pretzel, I said, take 2. That's what my grandfather wanted, that a sense of plenitude should reign. I could have enough for 2. When I went shopping with my grandmother and we stopped at a chock full of nuts coffee shop for a date nut sandwich with cream cheese, we split it. Now the man preparing my malted milk faltered. The aluminum canister was moist and slipped in his hands. Some of the malted spilled onto the work counter. In a quick motion, the man curled his fingers into a scoop and swept the spilled malted into the glass. My grandfather roared, "You are not going to give that to my granddaughter. You are not going to give that to my granddaughter." And he reached to grab the man behind the counter by the collar. I tugged at his arm, terrified. The store owner, in turn, pulled his clerk out of the way. Time stopped. "Fire the bum," my grandfather yelled as he stormed out of the store, pushing me ahead. Years later, I went to dinner with a man I loved very much. We were eating at a restaurant in Harvard Square. In my order of pad thai, there was a nail, not a fingernail, but a nail. I looked at my man expectantly. He suggested we leave. I agreed, but I felt righteous, angry, not at the restaurant owner or incompetent kitchen staff, but at my man for not taking care of me. He suggested that we might contact the health department. So before we left, we took down all the information we would need, the time, the fish, the waiter, the chef, the owner. My man never called the health department, nor did I. I missed my grandfather's rage.
Thank you for reading that. So here's my question.
I miss him. You can tell, he was a frustrated man who didn't have enough power in his life. And this is how he took, but I miss him. And what is your question, Donna?
No, I get it. I can appreciate that. My question is, I've known you a long time. And I texted you while I was reading the book, and I said to you, that I hope that, and I kind of feel like I haven't really supported you enough, because what you have done, you're at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, critiquing technology as a woman in a bastion of men. So it's the content of what you're doing, it's your gender. I mean, you are so courageous and such a feminist, the epitome of a feminist, I would say. And but having a man like your grandfather in your life, in your early life, I would imagine there's some kind of tension. because he's in a way, he's a model of a man to you. So I just was wondering, how do you reconcile the two? You're such a powerful feminist. And yet in that passage, it seems that there's maybe a way that you kind of think of men as protecting you. And given Milton and Charles and their lack of that, I have a sense of what's going on here. But I wanted to hear, what you have to say about that.
Well, I think that I want to just, I know that we want to leave time for questions, and this is a question that really, let me lie down on your couch, Rabbi Berman. But I mean, I'll say a few things. First of all, there's a long chapter in the book, which I recommend to you, about how MIT fired me before they rehired me. So they looked at me and my feminism and my critique, and they didn't say, "Oh, good, an in-house critic. Excellent. Just what we want. She's so brilliant. Let's have her. She writes all these brilliant books. Let's do this. Let's have this one around." It was, we negotiated our settlement. I didn't sue. We had a conversation. I mean, it wasn't a big dramatic. I mean, it's a very interesting chapter about how I ended up with my job at MIT. It was, but and then there's another chapter in the book where I describe how when Steve Jobs came to MIT and I was asked to cook dinner for him. I wasn't invited to have a meeting with him. I was asked to cook dinner for him.
Then he didn't show up. He showed up for 5 minutes or something, right?
Right. And then when he came, and I was told to make him a vegetarian meal because he was like some kind of super vegetarian. But apparently he wasn't the kind of vegetarian that I did. He came in and he said, "This is the wrong kind of vegetarian," and he left. So I couldn't even I didn't even succeed in the womanly role that I'd been given. So, I mean, I think that the complexity, but I feel very, I try to portray MIT in a very I try to, I'm not angry at MIT in this book because, it's their job to make the thing that I'm saying, hold on a second, hold on. Problems ahead. And so I think they need both people who are, while you're making something is not always the best, the easiest moment to be reflecting on it. And that's why I think they need a lot of people like me, not just me, but a lot of people like me who are working with their students, who are working with their faculty and trying to integrate the process of reflection into the process of making. So credit to them that they kept me on, credit to them that they're trying to integrate that into their teaching. But I mean, I'm sympathetic with their problem. But I would say I'm extremely engaged in active dialogue with some of their, with some of the projects that they're most enthusiastic about. I'm very critical of. And I think it's been from my point of view, I'm very glad I'm there, and I'm very glad that I've had a kind of front row seat on what's happening. Now, the question of whether or not my male models set me up for a life of trouble, I think now is not the time.
Suggesting it set you up for a life of trouble. I think
now's not the moment, right? Let's get some questions.
Yeah, I just want to say you're a very, very brave woman, and your work is just so essential at MIT, but in the world. And
thank you.
Yeah, very, very, very proud of you, my twin sister. Okay.
I think Mildred, I mean, I just want to say the thing that Don and I did discuss in advance is did I have a message? And I do have a sort of message, which is that, I didn't have, and Donna, who came from the same family, I mean, this was a family with a lot of troubles. This was a complicated family who didn't read the parenting manual. They didn't read, the parenting manual exactly right. At least my people didn't. And the reason I really feel I did okay was because deep attachments, really loving attachments to a child will get you through, even if people are making all kinds of mistakes and names and things. And, honestly, there was so much mishigas to get back to the Yiddish. I mean, there was so much going on that was confounding. But these people had deep, loving attachments to me. And I think that has sustained me. And as I wrote this book, I could feel their loving presence. And there was a lot of reconciliation and forgiveness and understanding of why they behaved as they did, as I wrote it, as I thought about it, as I understood better their situation and their problems. And I think no matter what's going on, deep loving attachments will really get you very far.
Hmm.
That's my message.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
That's why I call it the Empathy Diaries.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Jacques?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
Are there questions?
There aren't any questions in the chat, but if you'd like, I could open up, allow people to turn on their mics and cameras, or however you'd prefer.
Wait a minute, but Dale Berman is our cousin? Dale, wait, remember we commented on Dale, she wrote in there that she's our cousin, or?
Yes.
Oh, actually, this is the cousin that contacted you.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Dale. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so is it okay with you, Sherry, if we
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's take about 10 minutes and then we'll say goodnight. Do gallery view?
People should be able to turn on their mics and cameras now if they'd like.
Oh, Dale, you're a man. Hi, Dale.
Yeah.
Are you Junie's son?
No, I'm Jay. I'm Jay's son. Julius's son, who is Sam Bierman's son.
I'm named after Sam Berman.
Right.
I'm named after his grandfather.
Really? But I think my parents called your father Junie.
Jay. Yeah, but he went by Jay most of his life.
Yeah. Did you ever? Yeah. And I grew up knowing. Yeah. And you lived in California, Florida.
Miami.
Yeah.
Miami, Florida.
So hello, Dale and I have had one of the nice things about writing this book is I've gotten, emails from people I went to kindergarten with, from Dale, who's my, relative. So Dale, lovely to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
Great to meet
Family
you.
reunion. Dale, do you have a question or a comment about any of these people?
No, but I mean, I told Sherry when we talked a few weeks ago, that aspect of my family is something that I know very, very little about, because my father's father passed away when my father was 12 or 13 years of age. And my dad didn't really talk about things very much, but he was also a young teenager at the time that he passed. And so I am interested in genealogy and exploring one's roots. And when Sherry's book came around, and I told her that on page 11 of this book, there's a paragraph that taught me more about my family's history than I knew in my entire life. And I'm 64 years old.
Wow.
So,
wow, that's pretty cool.
It's just the book is fantastic. For those of you who have not read it, you really need to read this book. For me personally, there's a separate side of it about my history and my family's history that I'd love to explore further.
By the way, I want to tell you that my parents held your parents in very, very high esteem. Always I think I met your dad once or twice, but they really loved him. So just wanted you to know that.
One of the odd things about our family, and that I really don't understand, is that everybody held everybody in very high esteem, but saw each other very little. I, I,
Probably why.
I'm trying
That's
to
my
understand whether this is like a thing in American, a certain kind of American Jewish community, or if this was just us, or, I mean, very odd. Was it that we didn't have cars? Was people didn't drive? I mean, was everybody just, or was this just a Bonowitz thing? I mean, it was very particular for people who had such, intense feelings about each other, emotional feelings about deep. Honestly, no, very few sightings.
Yeah, Barry Marks, did you want to ask a question? And Barry Marks, I'm very happy you're here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. No, I didn't have a question.
Oh, you have your hand up. That's why.
I was raising my hand to say I had read the book before the first.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
Great presentation.
Sherry, this is Wesley Brown.
Yes.
And I just want to say that you have a lot of company in terms of some of the family of origin and extended family background. And I sent you some chats, and I'd certainly like to communicate with you or share with you more ideas about a memoir that I'm trying to put together as well.
Okay.
And you're quite an inspiration.
I don't get to see this chat, so send me an email. In other words, swipe your chat and send me an email, because I'm not.
Okay.
I don't.
I sent you like a private message with my email, but I don't know how to do that.
My email is sturkle@mit.edu. So anybody who wants to.
Got it.
I haven't been
Okay.
like, while I've been talking to Donna, I haven't been like reading the chats. I've been focusing just on Donna.
No
So,
problem. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you.
Turkle@mit.edu. And I love hearing from readers. Like, so please just email me. It really makes me happy, because one of the things about publishing a book during the pandemic is you never get to like go to a bookstore and see your readers and say, oh, I love this chapter. I didn't like that chapter. I've been sitting in this room.
It's all virtual.
It's all virtual.
That's right.
So
thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I encourage everyone to write a memoir. I teach memoir at MIT, and I really encourage people to write memoirs, because for example, I'll give an example from the book. One of the things about my mother, she lied about my father, and I really resented this. And I began to think of her as somebody who lied about stuff. And she, at one point, gave me a hat, a knitted hat that she said she had knitted for me. And I knew that I was 8 years old, and the memory is so intense. And I knew that this hat she had gotten at Lamston's, which was a 5 and dime near Church Avenue Station, where my grandparents lived. And it bothered me all my life that my mother had lied about that. It was like, there she goes again. It's like her grip on reality was. And when I wrote the memoir, I had a kind of, because they were like characters in a play, and I felt it was very important that I know where everyone was in their life. I had a kind of timeline of all of my people through their lives. And my mother had found out that she had breast cancer that was basically going to kill her, because there was no treatment for this kind of cancer. When she was coming back from the doctor and coming up, passing by that Lamston's, coming to pick me up when I was at my grandparents'. And I think she went didn't want to face her mother. Maybe gets a tissue, maybe stopped to get a drink at the diner, and bought me that hat just in a gesture of bringing me something. And it was like just some kind of manifestation of her love. And when she came and saw me, she just said, here's something for you, knowing that she wouldn't see me grow up, knowing that I would never know the truth. She was going to hide from me that she was ill because she wanted me to not be bothered by it. Well, she wanted me to go away to college if I wanted to. She wanted me to live as full a life. She knew she was going to tell nobody about her illness. And she gave me this hat at that moment of somehow wanting to connect with me. And I didn't learn that until I had done the work in this memoir of having everybody on their timeline, of seeing where everybody was in terms of her diagnosis, and I mean, doing all of that background work. And that was such a gift that writing this gave to me in terms of my empathy and my new connection with my mother. It was amazing. And I was having revelations like that. I mean, I want to say all the time, but there were many revelations like that. And so I think doing this kind of exercise, even just a little bit of it, is a deeply, deeply rewarding experience. So.
And you have been such a gift to us tonight. And you are such a gift in my life for my whole lifetime.
Thank you. You too, Donna.
And I love you. I thank you so much for being with us tonight and giving us so much to think about and to feel.
And I'm very touched, Dale, that you came. I'm honestly, that really is such a gift to Donna and me to. But we're going to have a Bonowitz Berman family reunion.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that's right.
This group has got to get together.
That's right.
Get a little love here. Okay.
That's right. I love it. Everybody, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Get a copy of this book. It will warm your heart. It's a great Mother's Day present.
It is. And it's a mother, grandmother, daughter. It's a mother, grandmother, daughter present. It is.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Bless you all. We hope to see you next week at the art opening. And your presence here tonight meant so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jana.
Lots of love. I'm going to call you.
Thank you. The link to the book is in the chat.
Bye, Dale. Let's be in touch.
Okay, I'll send you an email.
Okay. Lots of love, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.